Speakers to come on stage with me. Some of you here, 3 of you here, and 1 here. Unless you want to sit on each other's laps, I mean, whatever. Reza, do you want to come and take a seat? Yeah. Please feel free.
Hallo allemaal. Ik mag wat zeggen. En dat vind ik zo leuk om te doen. Want weten wij hoe vaak de kookboekenweek tot dusver is georganiseerd? Degene die het raadt, die krijgt een kookboek van me. Ik ben Harold, ik ben directeur bij Scheltema. En ik heet jullie van harte welkom op deze bijzondere kookboekenweek presentatie. We hebben vandaag 4 fantastische kookboekenschrijvers. En ik kan lekker spieken, dat is wel weer fijn, hè? Dat ik zo kan kijken. Reza. Noni. Hi.
Just don't stop clapping.
Judith. Hoi. Noah. Hoi. Jongens, van harte welkom. Ik blijf hier niet lang kletsen, want dat is helemaal niet de bedoeling. Ik wil alleen zeggen dat de presentatie vanmiddag wordt opgenomen en live uitgezonden via social media. Dus als je beroemd wil worden, spring je naar voren en dan is daar de camera. Veel plezier vanmiddag.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Harold. Thank you. Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming. My name is Lelani Lewis, and today is our first ever, hopefully not our last. I'm looking at you, Harold. You can't hear me. Hopefully not our last Toko Talks talk. So Toko Talks came from a place where I basically moved to Amsterdam 7 years ago and was incredibly homesick and didn't know how to solve this homesickness. And so I started going into Tokos, which are amazing places full of like a whole array of different cultural foods. And usually you be greeted with a massive smile, or if you went to the one in on Albert Kite Market, remember does anyone know the guys? Exactly, the Troppischwinkel. You'd be greeted with a, "Hello lady, how are you?" So it just felt like home. And I just thought it would be amazing to actually go into Tokos with different chefs and start talking about all of these cultural cuisines and items that are within Tokos, and talking about like the intersections between food culture and identity. It felt really important to me because Toko's just basically said, this is a place to feel safe as a child or a person of a diaspora, and this is where all of your foodstuffs are. So anyway, I wanted to bring some of these amazing speakers here today. I don't know how we've managed to bag such an amazing lineup of speakers. You guys look very comfy and cozy there. Super gezellig. Have you got enough room? Sweating all over each other. So we have Reza, Noni, Judith, and Noah, all of which are amazing authors of books themselves. And so we're going to start asking questions. I'm going to ask them questions about their books, but also how they see the connection between culture and identity. So, let's get into it. What I found really interesting, or kind of actually a bit disappointing for many, like when you go into bookshops or when you look at the different array of books, is how little there are books of authors of color. And so I came across this statistic and I was like, what? That can't be true. But between 1950 and 2018, 95% of books published by major publishing houses, like Penguin Random House, were written by white authors. What do you think of that?
Doesn't surprise me at all.
No? Great way to start the talk.
It's not, I think it's, is this on?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? So I think it's probably not the case of lack of authors, it's who controls what gets published,
Yeah.
right? So if it's owned by a particular group of people who want to publish a particular group of people, whether it be male or not female, or I'm sure if you look up the stats for women publishers, or book authors versus male, it would also be surprisingly sad.
Yeah.
And I think, or it would probably fall in a certain genre of like lifestyle, right? Not, because that's what's sellable for. So I don't know if that's such a huge shocker, to be honest.
No, but it does
Right.
show that it needs to
It's
change.
sad.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like,
that's
right?
it.
Like
Yeah, for
5% is a very tiny number and not representative of the population of the world, you know? And I think for me, BIPOC representation in books it's hugely significant because it basically is vital to cultural preservation and food cultures, you know? Like, we preserve our food cultures in the books that we write, you know? And that's super important. So if you've only got 5% of the population doing that, then you lose all of this knowledge.
Yeah, but there's something else also. It's not only representation in the book authors. It's not that only. I think we have something to grow still as a nation, as Black people, because our recipes are given from mother to father to families. That is not really a writing culture, it's a speaking culture. You give it to your child, and so we preserve our recipes. And we recently start writing our recipes down because the generation that does it from scratch and out of head is starting to fade. So we have to write now. So I don't think it's also a bit of it's a white publishing area, but we ourselves have to grow, still have to grow and find our own recipes and ways. And there is no concurrence. We have to. I think there will be more books coming.
Absolutely. I think, especially since 2020, I read somewhere that someone was saying that for 300 years, especially within the Black community, and that, you know, Black people were not allowed to read, were not allowed to write, you know, so they didn't have the opportunity. So actually they were forced to share traditions and cultural recipes through oral history. But now I think, yeah, you're right. Now is the time to actually start writing
But it's
these
also
down.
nice to see that it works, because it was mouth for mouth, mother to father to daughter, and there are still lots of recipes, and you see books coming up everywhere. So we're strong,
Yeah.
and we can do it.
Yeah.
It's nice to see.
Absolutely. So I'm going to do a small introduction of each speaker and then give them 2 questions. And each speaker is going to be asked, where is their favorite Toko and why? Because that's why we're here. We're here to talk around the subject of Tokos, but mostly what they represent. So we're going to start with, well, let's start with Noni because she's already got the microphone. Okay, so Noni is a professional chef, having worked in some of Amsterdam's culinary institutes like the Plantage, Toscanini, Victorian Island, and Koba, as well as kitchens in Paris. Now she works as a recipe writer. She's a mother of 2, and she does food styling. I think you're like one of the only other food stylists of color that I know. I don't know anyone else.
No, me neither.
Her first cookbook was written together with Yona Freud, which is an encyclopedic guide on preserving fruits and vegetables. And her second book, help me out with the pronunciation.
Sweetie
Thank you. And I want to ask you what that means. Explores the wealth of influences in Caribbean food. She came over to my house for dinner and she was talking about her book, and I was like, no, that's what I wanted to write about. You've taken my idea. But it was amazing that, you know, you broke down within your book, like, the different influences that happen, like, that all collide within the melting pot that is Suriname.
Yeah, I think not that much people in the Netherlands know exactly why all the different people live in Suriname and when they came and why they came and who brought them, which is strange because it's a Dutch history. And I really wanted to tell that story, and I did it through the food they make and the food they brought and the food they are creating now, which is totally different from the places where they came from, of course. But it's a very interesting melting pot. That's what you always say.
It's the best way to describe it, right?
It is what it is. Yeah.
Speaking back to like the preservation of food culture, you obviously went to Suriname to do research for your book, and you went to what I read about you. I mean, I don't know. You can tell us a bit more. You went to relatives who you hadn't met before. You were learning about like some of these cooking techniques and the different influences and why they were there and the different ingredients that each culture brought in. So, what did you learn about the connection between food and culture?
Well, it was what I actually already know is that food is so important in Surinamese culture. And when you arrive in someone's home and you've never met them, you always get food and you always have to eat it, and it's always nice.
Really? You haven't tasted my auntie's cooking?
No?
Only one.
Well, the people the last time I went to Suriname was amazing, and I asked from each culture one person to teach me things that I didn't know yet, so dishes or recipes that aren't really common and you can find in all little restaurants and stuff, but people, what they eat at home. So I learned many new recipes and things that I really didn't know yet, which was really, really, really nice for me to do.
Yeah, and did you learn much about yourself through meeting these relatives?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if I learned much about myself.
About like your identity, like being, because you're half Dutch and half Surinamese.
Well, when I'm in Suriname, I always feel at home.
Yeah.
I was raised in Amsterdam, but I really feel the connection of me in Suriname. And when the plane lands and I'm getting out of the plane, it feels like you can smell it and you can feel it. But I also feel like I'm somewhere. I also belong in Amsterdam, but I also belong there. That's how I feel it.
That's lovely. But a cookbook is never just a cookbook, right? As we were saying earlier, you pour your heart, soul, blood, whatever, everything into it. But can you speak on that, because a lot of the time people just think, oh yeah, it's just a cookbook and it's just got recipes in it. Like, it's nothing more than that. But obviously it's way more than that. So can you speak on that?
I think it's a story. For me, this book was very personal because I went to relatives and I tell the history of Suriname, which feels like my history. So that's why it's hard work and it's scary actually to have everybody can read it because it's so personal and but it's also really nice.
Thank you. Okay, now do you want to give the mic over to Judith and we'll do an introduction of Judith. So cooking and eating has been a large part of Judith's upbringing. She was raised on Surinamese classics like pom and bacalhau, and as I know now, obviously pepper pot. Didn't even know that was in Suriname. As much as oysters, asparagus, and nice wine. Judith, I know from conversations we've had that you don't like to be stereotyped or pigeonholed into any one cuisine. You like to cook a variety of cuisines and no different kitchens. Which also meant that saw you cooking with Ottolenghi in London. It's nice. She runs workshops, does private dinners, writes for the Trouw, and finally started a lunchroom called the Buitenvrouw. Thank you. Was that an okay pronunciation?
That's a very okay pronunciation, yes.
Of which she received rave reviews from Mara Grimm of the Het Parool. And then had your first cookbook. When was that? When did that get released?
Almost 2.5 years.
Wow. Okay.
Ago, we released Paramaribo.
And that also explores your Surinamese roots.
Yeah, because I think Suriname is more than only the Creole version. We have so many. It's a melting pot of different cultures throughout the ages as well. So that's why.
But why is that important? Because Nonnie was talking about the fact that basically, not many people know about that here in the Netherlands, but obviously it's just as much intertwined in because it was colonized by the Dutch. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, I heard that when your book was released, you received criticism which said, oh my God, why can't this just be a cookbook? Why do we have to talk about slavery? What do you say to that?
Well, I don't talk about slavery. I talk about our history, combined history, Dutch combined history.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I give workshops, people, they think if they have a workshop that is Surinamese, they go, oh, we're going to cook. It's going to be fun, music, and all of those things, and very tasty. But to understand me is to understand where I come from.
Yeah.
And you can understand me by eating my food and by knowing what that food means. And also the dish that I brought to the pepper pot is, we didn't have ketchup before. That came later with the Chinese. But we had kasriep throughout the whole Caribbean area as well. So I tell a story about history. And when I talk about Suriname and the history and what happened there, and also that it's, well, it's the elephant in the room. I can't talk about my food without saying something about our combined history.
Absolutely.
And why we eat.
Yeah.
So I have to.
Yeah, you have to.
It tells a story. It tells my
completely
story.
intertwined.
It tells how I see life, and well, hopefully a better future for me and my grandchildren as well. My children and my grandchildren.
Absolutely.
To understand where we come from. Yeah.
People need to know. And I think what's really interesting about Caribbean food and Surinamese food is that it is a triumph over adversity, you know? A lot of the people who were forcibly brought into the Caribbean, you know, had to work with what they could find, had to work with the
Very
few
creative
ingredients
as well.
that they brought.
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, like we can talk about, yes, slavery was intertwined in that history, but at the same time, it isn't all focused on the trauma. You know, I personally don't like to focus on that.
We survived by food, I
Exactly.
guess.
Yeah.
Yes. Creativity and food.
And it brings a lot of joy, and you can see that within the Caribbean people, you know, that food really brings a lot of joy.
Certainly.
Oftentimes, I feel like within mainstream media that European foods are seen as non-sophisticated, basic. Akane was like, don't say this, but I'm going to. Sometimes people's hygiene comes into question, plus it's always expected to be cheap. It's expected to be cheap, non-Western foods, that is. How do you think we can change these narratives?
We do, I do.
Yes, good for you, damn straight.
Yeah, that's true. There is no question about, because I think that it was, and it isn't at the moment, because ingredients are very expensive as well.
Yeah.
And even the high-end chefs use cassava, they use all kinds of ingredients that we also use.
Yeah.
And I think if you want quality, if you come to my house, you don't, well, then I can guess that the price, there is no price. But if you want to hire me as a professional, I don't say I'm European schooled. I like to say that I'm just here. I don't like to be called, every time somebody asks me if I can cook, they want to know if I'm schooled in Holland as well. But I think I cook the world. I don't have to be European schooled to go to sell my food.
No. I agree.
Taste it
Totally.
and pay the price that it meets. Well,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah. Isn't it, Noah? You have a restaurant.
Does anyone else on the panel want to answer that question about the fact that actually non-Western foods do not receive the respect or the price tags that other maybe European foods receive? Does anyone else want to speak on that? Yeah, Noah's like, yes, give me the mic.
Talk about it, right?
Yeah.
Previously, I did a whole talk about this subject of basically, why is it that if I say I own a French restaurant, the perception is immediately very clear? And if I say I own a Surinamese, Indonesian, Ghanaian, whatever, there's a slur of names we can say,
Yeah.
that you're like, oh, so then it must be like a fast food spot that's 20 and under. That's racism. It's like, it's so brilliantly placed because it's wrapped around food, and food is such a nostalgic and beautiful thing that we tend not to put any hate towards it. But you can literally dislike someone's culture. Sorry. You can literally like someone's culture, hate their culture and love their food. I mean, a lot of the times that is the case. And I think it's a double-edged sword. We can go quite deeper in my own history, but I think in general when it comes to even the word ethnic, where does ethnic fall in the context of the class of food that it's in? Is it Michelin? Right? Because it's clearly not. Is it local? No. So what does ethnic mean? And what space does it own?
Yeah.
It's pretty shit space, right? So I think we have to be very careful with the context, very careful with the words we use when describing someone's culture
Absolutely.
and food. And we really have to respect our economic vote of how when we decide to pay for food, that if I tell you that it's fermented daikon with a hazelnut dashi and you can, right? And then I wrap a French bubble around it, it's €100 for a tasting, please, and you won't question it. But the moment that I start to say other ingredients that are all from the same space, right? Sugar, poppy seeds, garlic, ginger, that's all from not here, right? Like none of that is from here. And Europe as a whole, it's not from here. Potatoes, nothing, just nothing. But I'm being real. No, I'm just saying like there's so much imported spices. And yeah, thank you. So there's a clear list, right? And there are things, but when you look at historically where they're from, it's not here, right? And if we're talking about Holland, then we really can say not here. So I think it's it's really up to us as consumers, it's up to us as cookbook authors, chefs, to be very, very, I think, trained. Don't go out there and start calling yourself a chef if you're not going to do some damage in that space. Like, respect the space and go to work, right? But then demand the correct reaction. If you're out there bullshitting with your food, then that's the reaction you're going to get. And that happens a lot of the times, right? But that's across the board. That's French bistros, that's Chinese spots, that's Italian joints. There's plenty of, like, not okay joints. They still get a certain level of respect because of the culture that's wrapped behind it. So, I don't know, in terms of food colonialism, whatever little phrase that we feel like giving it, we all really have to be very conscious about how we think about food and where we hold certain standards of certain countries, right? I understand that Escoffier decided to write down this immense book that I damn near memorized in my life, but it's because on the back of colonialism, that they had money, that he had time to do that, where, it's so deep-rooted of how it gets positioned, that we can literally sit there and use oregano and cinnamon and then not even respect the culture that it comes from, like blatantly, like, nope, not dealing with them. But I love the cinnamon. Next question. Like, I don't know.
But do you not think that's because people don't necessarily know where the ingredients come from? Because, for example, so many people don't know that potatoes are from Peru. Like, people, and the national dish of the Netherlands is stamper, made with Peruvian potatoes. If you knew that, do you think then people would have more respect for some of these ingredients if they understood the provenance of them?
I don't know.
Not
Maybe
yet.
the second generation would?
It takes time.
Yeah.
It takes time. We're in the process of telling our stories now. We're in the process of telling our stories. And with telling our stories comes our food.
Yeah.
So it will take time.
I read something really Nonny raised it. Just one sec. I had a thought because I read something really interesting about the fact that the reason why there isn't haute cuisine in Africa is because of colonialism, because there was so much scarcity, like basically through warmongering from the Europeans, that it was just survival. Eating was survival. It wasn't necessarily about the development of, exactly. But not to say that the food isn't still delicious.
Haute cuisine comes from excess. It doesn't come from.
Why do you say haute cuisine? Because it's a European concept, not.
Exactly, and there's also
I don't
that,
know, yeah.
like that understanding of what elevated food is. That is almost that you have to re-educate yourself, because by me saying that is also putting it in a box of this definition of, well, what's the pinnacle of food, you know? Nani, sorry, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, it's gone.
Oh,
No, but
I hate
agree
it when
with
that
you
happens.
That, well, you said haute cuisine wasn't in Africa, but maybe they just aren't interested in eating this way.
There was kings and queens.
Yeah.
They had nice
But
things,
still,
of course.
you're saying it. It's a European concept.
Exactly. It's a European standard. Yeah.
It's not an African standard.
Yeah,
So why
yeah.
compare them to the?
But not even just that, like you have thousands of years of like millions of years of food being cooked again and again and refined. Like who's to say that that isn't the height of, that's not the pinnacle of gastronomy?
Exactly.
Do we have any questions from the audience so far? Is everyone's feeling really shy? They're like, oh my God, no. No questions? No?
If I can
Fine.
add something.
Of course you can, Reza,
well,
yeah.
I'm actually not a cookbook author. I write children's books, and I'm a media scholar here at the University of
I was
Amsterdam.
going to do your
And-
introduction.
and that, no, but answering your question about the situation you described, I think, and that's what I do with my students, we deconstruct the media objects, and in this case, food television. I deconstruct food television programs with my students. And what we clearly see is that in a lot of these food programs and also a lot of food literature, you can observe a perpetuation of a colonial racial hierarchy. And that's what we
yeah.
need to deconstruct. So
Absolutely.
answering your question, what can we do?
Yes.
We need to deconstruct the racial hierarchy
Absolutely.
present in all our forms of media and culture, so not just food, television, food program, whatever. And one of the objects that I analyzed with my students is Ugly Delicious.
Yeah.
On Netflix.
Yeah.
And there's one specific episode on fried rice in which this specific topic is being discussed. So for the people who haven't watched this episode or haven't watched the show yet, go watch it. The episode on fried rice is exactly tackling this issue. Why is Chinese food being seen, being perceived as low food or whatever, fast food, unhygienic, etc. And why are other types of food, mainly Western food, seen as the pinnacle of culinary whatever?
Absolutely.
So we need to deconstruct it, and we need to, going back to one of your earlier comments, Noah, we need to look at who is in charge of commissioning food programs, who is in charge of commissioning the cookbooks that we have. We need to replace a lot of these people. That's one of my solutions. That's one of the solutions that I discuss with my students. What do we need to do in the Dutch context, for instance? What do we need to do? We need to replace a lot of people in charge now at the NPO in Hilversum. That's one of the solutions.
Yeah. But I think what is really interesting, what you mentioned, is that we need to dismantle some of these ideas of these hierarchies. But sometimes we are so, what's the words? Indoctrinated, that we don't even know that we're upholding some of these beliefs. So how do you go around like being critical enough to be able to say, actually, yeah, I need to, like some of these constructs just shouldn't exist anymore? How do you reflect on that?
True. And even, I mean, we ourselves unknowingly internalize some of these racial hierarchies as well. I mean, I'm a man of color, but I have internalized ideas that are actually against my own body. So we've internalized it as well. Yeah, the only thing we can do is critically. Yeah, it might sound simple, but we need to critically analyze all these objects. And it is a simple task, so to say, but I think a lot of us don't have the time to do so, for instance. And that goes for me as well. But yeah, that's what I try to teach my students. You know, we need to critically look at all types of media and cultural objects, etc.
Absolutely, yeah. I was reading this book about Columbus discovering the Americas and coming across all of these foods, and this author was very sympathetic to Columbus and saying, you know, without Columbus, you know, all of these foods wouldn't have been possible, and they were, before Columbus and the Europeans went to the New World, they were eating strange things like worms and very critical. And as I was reading it, I was like, oh, okay, I also need to be critical of the person, the author writing these books, and the opinion that they're putting across, because this is not of the mindset that I have, or even maybe a modern day mindset. So yeah, you're right, you have to be very critical of everything that you consume. Okay, I'm gonna do an introduction of Noah, so you can get to know him a bit more. I've known Noah for, how long have I known you for now? Maybe 3 or 4 years?
3 years.
So actually, working with Noah is part of the reason why we're here today, because during the pandemic, we started, along with Joris Beidendijk, Samuel Levy, Willem Stoutenbeck, we started this online thing when Clubhouse was popping during the pandemic, when no one had anywhere to go. So everyone was like, yeah, what's happening on Clubhouse? It was the place to have a party. So we started doing these talks called Melting Pot, which is why I just love that phrase so much. Talking all about like the issues within the food industry and lack of representation in the food industry. And that came to an abrupt end, right? Like, I think everyone's schedules were super busy, and I just felt like it really needed to happen again. So yeah, we're here talking about these subjects again. But this, when I was writing his bio, I was like, this dude has done too much. I'm tired even writing this. So this is Noah Toko. He's a chef, he's a restaurateur, an entrepreneur, a showrunner of High Cuisine, which is a series on Videoland that follows Noah and his partner Tony as they fuse haute cuisine and mind-expanding herbs, basically drugs, into unique dishes, and ultimately the guests invited to their dinners. He has some stories to tell people. He studied at the Culinary Institute of America and earned his stripes in Michelin star restaurants. Since moving to Amsterdam, he's had his hand in opening 4 restaurants? Oh, okay. And he's also written 2 books. So, tell us about your books that you've written.
So we came up with a concept called High Cuisine, and basically it's taking the best drugs in the world and the best ingredients in the world and mixing them and creating a tasting menu, to keep it short. And first what we were doing was trying to knock down and question the taboos. So first, what is a food and what is a drug? Everybody thinks it's very clear. We immediately called bullshit, and I said, okay, so what's foie gras, what's caviar, what's cannabis, what's wine, what's psychedelics? So there's a very thin line that runs. A lot of it is legally based, off of politics and guidelines that are set by the people that we pay our taxes to. But it was clear that we didn't know the difference. People go out to a Michelin star restaurant and get a Petrus from 1980. That is a drug. That is clearly a drug. You're paying $4,000 for a bottle of rotten grapes, and I mean, let's be right. Like, let's be clear. I mean, it's done to perfection, but it's not a food. It's not health. There's no health benefit to it. There's nothing.
Oh, I thought I was getting my 5 a day from it. No?
British. So we started to very question it, and we took. I'm kind of classically French trained, and so was Tony, and it seemed too perfect to not call it high cuisine, and in French being haute cuisine. It was too much of a play on the entire concept of it, and it started in one of our restaurants. It's a very small 35-seat kind of neo bistro we had, where we did tasting menus every week and changed it every week. And we started to play and test with groups of people like late night on Fridays, and they would come in and we'd give them small tastings and find our dosage. And obviously I'm a very open drug user, and everything that's organic and natural, so nothing that's manufactured or randomly combined in someone's basement. This is more about things that are 2,000 to 3,000 years old, that have been used for centuries and millenniums to either help guide us on the right path, fix something that's wrong. It's medicinal, and I think we've started to unlearn what medicinal and food and the connection that it really has. I spoke about it earlier, of things like that are very common now, but were clearly only used for medicinal until the turn of the century with Industrial Revolution, and we could afford to everybody to have not one garlic but 20 garlic in their house, and dried oregano and thyme, and all of these are medicinal, right? Like oregano oil soothes arthritis. And there's a list of things that come from multiple items that are sitting on our shelves. And we don't know it because now it's for the luxury of making a really nice tomato sauce, which is dope, but we have to make sure that we don't start to cast out things like cannabis and psilocybin and psychoactive plants that are very, very relevant to humans. And the best way to introduce this to people is through food, at least in our opinion. And the best way to introduce it through food is at a very, very high level, because then no one questions it. And that happens to be our specialty. Is I really like very, very good drugs, and we were trained to cook very, very high-end food. So we started to mix them, and we started with 8 courses, 7 courses, like you would go for omakase tasting, and you would sit down, and it would be completely dialed in, and it would be the experience that you expect to have. Except by the end of it, you were kind of on a magic carpet. And
or at least you thought you were.
yeah. So everything is very microdosed. Everything is extremely pure, intentional, of course, so that we can really dial in on particular dosages. So we can dosage per person, per group, as an individual level. So that's what we did, and in that process, we decided we should start filming this. So we started to film it and document it. Long story long, we ended up making a show out of it in the Netherlands. And we drove around all the provinces. We got some big old Range Rover, went to Michelin star chefs, went to grow farms, went to other spaces that kind of show us what they were doing in those regions, and kind of flipped it for our steez, and made a tasting menu out of it. Invited a bunch of people at the end of each show. They would try whatever regional drugs and ingredients that we had gathered from that particular moment, and you had a high cuisine episode. And then after that, we ended up making a cookbook of like Amuse or Bites. And then recently, about a year ago, we made a cocktail book, a non-alcoholic psychoactive cocktail book. And we went around and got a bunch of the best bartenders in Amsterdam, but also Benelux, and was like, I gotta draw drugs, let's get down. And that's pretty much what we did with them. And we added our culinary insight, and they added their particular knowledge for a bar. And we made a non-alcoholic cocktail book. But this all questions, all of this basically also just comes back to questioning what is the norm. Because we've all gone to different countries and experienced different foods. They do different drugs, they drink different alcohol, they smoke a different cigarette or whatever they're smoking. We've all experienced those moments. And at least for us, it was about just questioning all of it. As a chef, I would have experiences in my own restaurants where people would walk in and immediately see 2 black chefs. Tony, my business partner, is a black dude from London, and they would come in and immediately be like, oh, you guys opening a Surinamese restaurant? And I would be like, no, I don't know one drop of Surinamese recipes. Like, he's classically French, I'm classically French trained and Japanese trained. And so it made you feel a certain way, because in the States, that doesn't happen. So it was a very different perspective of what I was seeing of the culture around me. And then even when we started to cook and then started to tell people, oh, we're doing a seasonal menu, we change it every week, they also didn't know what the hell we were talking about. This is 10 years ago, 11 years ago, right? So people would be like, yeah, but is it French? Is it Italian? What type of kitchen is it? And we were like, a seasonal kitchen. So that's new, huh? That's new in Amsterdam, that food culture, that language, that vocabulary. And so yeah, we ended up making this concept to just question everything and push impact. So we're taking drugs from South Africa that the Zulu warriors used to use, and from Ecuador that the shamans used to use, and we're mixing them with langoustines and caviar and white truffle, and I mean, yeah, what's better than white truffle and psychedelic truffle? Nothing.
I wanted to try and get you guys some drinks today so you could also feel like you were on a magic carpet, but unfortunately, they're all sold out, so
Yeah,
yeah.
we made a drink, and it's now on a third press, and but we sold out of we made a kratombucha. Kratom is a drug from Southeast Asia, and it's in the caffeine and opiate family, and we made a kombucha out of it, and yeah, it's sold. It's sold.
That's good.
So we're in the process now of doing another batch. Yeah.
I have a question for you, because you're just about to open a new restaurant, which you've been like building as, you know,
Right now.
literally with your own bare hands,
Yeah.
called Ladybird FC. But fried chicken has a bit of a kind of double-edged sword sort of history. It was used a lot to exacerbate like negative stereotypes of black people.
Yeah.
And like so many other European foods, actually. But how do you plan on reclaiming back the pride in this dish?
Yeah, so we're in the process of opening a spot called Ladybird Fried Chicken, and it's in the pipe. It's a straight up New York take on a Southern table, and it's exactly what my upbringing's in. So I'm a black Jewish dude from New York. So I was raised eating matzo ball soup and gefilte fish, but also eating fried chicken in the same day, damn near in the same hour. So I have a very hyper New York experience, a very hyper American experience, and with all the stereotypes that come with both of those kind of iconic American cultures, right? And when I came out here, I never, not even out here, not here, in general, I ran from my own culture when I started to cook, because it wasn't considered to be high-end enough.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is Sunday food, like this is what grandma cooks. This isn't what Jean-Louis is cooking, because Jean-Louis is getting $100 a plate. Grandma gives it away. But, so as we get older, okay. But I end up, so I did that. I took that route. I kept my head down. I worked in every Michelin star kitchen you could think of in New York. And I went to Japan and Cali and France, and I did what I was supposed to do. And almost ran from it in a real shitty way. And it was personal, like it was in my house, and I didn't let many people in my house, so it was always a very like home cooked meal, that it was friends and family, but it wasn't for the public, because the public judged that food with a very negative overshadow to it. But to be honest, now I'm at the point in my life, lucky enough, that I don't give a shit. And fried chicken is dope.
I think we can tell.
Good fried chicken is even better.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
you know,
I tasted your fried chicken. It's some of the best fried chicken I've had.
and I think in my own personal space, I've gotten and created enough accolades that I'm satisfied with myself, that I feel like this is so needed, and I'm a really, and you guys, you know this, I'm a big believer in not just claiming your space, but taking it. And I think we don't do that enough as brown people, is take the space. We tend to wait until it's given and then do as much as we can with it. Now it's starting to change, right? That's what this conversation is about documenting and writing books and TV shows and being more public and behind it, right? And owning it. And I think that's why this fried chicken is becoming so personal, even as we develop it, that it screams our culture. And even when you walk in, it's more of this John Coltrane Basquiat feel to it, because that's how I define and view that world of soul food, as it's so amazingly abused, that term. And I think that there's just a different definition for me of where fried chicken, that space of that type of food, lies. And it is very, very far from the bottom, right? And it's damn near at a 2-star Michelin level is where I'm starting to hold it. And it's because I'm defining it, right? Like, I'm giving it that credit, which I feel like I'm allowed to give it. And I mean, now granted, this is also the flip. Because of my cooking pedigree, I still like those things. I still like champagne and caviar, right? Like, that shit is still really tasty. So we're mixing them. So it's a fried chicken spot that pairs all the fried chicken with champagne and bubbles and caviar, right? Because that's my definition of New York meeting the South. Because
Amsterdam.
in Amsterdam, right? Because that's where I'm at right now. The most has me here. But yeah, so that's what it is, and that's what we're opening. And I feel like I want to. Now, the funny part of this is that once a month, there's a 6-seat bar downstairs that we'll be doing an omakase tasting at, and it's like, so I don't want to lose that. I still want to have that 8-course tasting. I still want to experience that, but it's inside of a fried chicken joint.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we have to start embracing, the highs, the lows, the middles, and everything in between, and just making sure it's dialed, and it's dialed in, and it's done right. And if you don't know how to do it right, go get somebody that does know how to do it right.
Yeah.
But I think that's important.
Definitely.
You know?
There's a huge story to tell behind fried chicken as well.
It is.
Which
You'll
I
see
think
it
you're
all over the
doing that.
restaurant. We did it on purpose.
I
There's
love
murals
that.
all over, and stories about where fried chicken came from.
Yeah.
And
Which is a story of pride.
But isn't fried chicken, especially from the American
South.
side,
Yeah.
and not especially from the Caribbean, but we fry chicken as well, but
sure.
it's a, there's an overlap, but there isn't also, isn't it? Because fried chicken, the fried chicken you're talking about is really, to me, it's really American.
Yeah.
But
Definitely.
it was.
I'm not Caribbean.
No.
Like, I'm not
Yeah,
African. I'm not Caribbean. I'm American.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how many generations do I need to be from America to just be American? There's not
You are.
Polish American or, like, I'm American. You know what I'm saying? Like, my grandparents, I'm not Jewish American. So I think that's also part of claiming that space and being like, yo, this is just what it is.
But the roots of fried chicken comes from freely slaves.
Yeah, so the
African.
roots are basically, so there's a couple stories. One is very Senegalese, actually, the frying of chicken in itself. And then the spices that came over, but it's also, there's some Scottish heritage to it as well.
Yeah, I've read that.
But there's a mix, right? So I think as there were slaves, chicken was in abundance. It got fried regularly, but because of the spices from Africa and the frying culture of Senegalese, but also Scottish, it ended up becoming this, what we know now is kind of this modern day fried chicken. And that happened through the Caribbean, that happened through, it was just who was owning that space at the time, French, British, la la la. And as slavery ended, right, it was one of the only products that slaves could sell. So you would find them outside of the train tracks selling these big, huge plates of fried chicken, and it would be a lady with a bird. And that's what this is. It would be, dozens of women outside with their own recipe frying this chicken, and then it would turn into a shack, and then it would turn into a restaurant. And this is decades and decades, but so that's how it evolved. So, and they would have these trains that would have like Chicken Bone Express, because there would be tons of chicken bones on the side of the track from people eating through the window, grabbing chicken, throwing it back out. So it is very American for us, right? It's hyper American, where I think it's the pinnacle of soul food in America, where I think in the Caribbean, fried chicken is not the pinnacle. No.
That's why.
Yeah.
That's why I'm a little bit. I love the idea. I'm certainly going to create a recipe.
Oh, I think we'll all come in.
Champagne.
Right.
Yeah.
Really gonna do it. But I think as black people, we have also.
Do you want to give microphone?
We also have different backgrounds in stories, and because the Americans, you had to fight your fight on the land. We have Holland had colonies, and that's why if you say we don't know our history, our combined history, that's so different, so different.
Sure.
Nice to hear your side of our culture as well.
Riza, I don't want to leave you sitting there not being able to speak. But first, I just want to ask, does anyone have any questions that they want to pose to the authors? We are going to have a moment where we're going to have wine and some snacks afterwards. But does anyone have any questions for the authors before we move on to Riza? No? Yeah, sure.
I was just recently writing an essay about Dutch food culture. You know, we had these conversations a lot. And, my experience, a lot of Dutch people say we don't have Dutch food culture. I believe Dutch food culture does exist, and I think Dutch people should just reconcile that Dutch food culture is migration culture, shaped by colonialism. What I really like about what Noah and Judith were saying and also are doing is that creating your own space, right? And the question I wanted to ask is, the Toko talk started with the standard. We talked about the standard and how we break the standard.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it would be great if we could flip that when we start these conversations. To not start with the colonial Western standard and think, oh, how can we have a seat at the table, break the standard, break the norm. So I wanted to ask you guys, Noah and Judith, because I do think you're already doing this, what would for you be your standard? You know, like how would, you know, when we are having these conversations, what would you say is the space that you're creating? You know, and I just wanted you to share that because I just feel like we keep missing the point when we say, well, statistics are, or, you know, how cuisine is, and I'm just like, no, for us it starts with who we are. You know, so I just wanted to ask you, what would you say is your standard?
Judith, you have the mic.
We know your standard.
Mic drop. What is my standard? A nice question. I let it sink in for a second.
I think first off, at least for me, my standard has, it changes. It grows, and we should be allowed that space as well. So that's first off. I shouldn't have to be stuck in, because that's part of the problem, right? I think, is that we get stuck in a standard, and then that's the standard, and then that's everyone's standard, and then it's like, so how do we grow from here? So first off, to understand that it's fluid, and that I'm going to change next year, and I'm going to evolve next year. After I do this restaurant, I'm going to feel different. And then I might say, I want 10 of them shits, right? Like I want 20 of them. So I think that's also, or I don't want to do this anymore, and I'm going back to Michelin. And that should also be my standard, and I should be allowed to have that freedom, one, without getting judged by my own space, because that happens critically a lot. And definitely being mixed race, biracial, is that I don't hold fast to black culture, Jewish culture. It's me, mine, it's me, it's personal, it's my shit. And I'm going to stand up for who I feel like isn't being represented correctly, but that could also be the little Jewish grandma in the corner. So that's my standard, and I feel like it's personal, and it needs to be respected that it's personal, because yours is different, yours is different, mine's different. And I think what bothers me is that there's this automatic connective tissue between brown people that is quite pseudo. It's not a real thing. And I think that you still earn it. You still have to earn that connection. You know, I mean, I'm gonna have favoritism if I see something happening to like a brown woman in public. Don't get it twisted. But I think there's also a level of why do I have to be like that person over there because they're brown?
Yeah.
That's not the thing.
Yeah.
That's not a thing.
Yeah.
That's not my thing. Because my story is way different than everybody else's, and I want it to be different, right? Like, I want it to be about the individual, the experience, their life, whatever they have grown to be, because my brown is different than your brown, you know, and my story is different than your story. And that's part of, I think, what should be even focused on more is how many different stories there are, right? And that it is such a diverse group of people, instead of it getting bottlenecked into this soul food culture or this Caribbean culture. That's a broad stroke
Yeah.
to say Caribbean culture. That's
Yeah.
crazy to me, you know? And I think that's where, to answer the question, right?
Okay.
But then I think that's really. Do you wanna
Yes.
do your take on
Taking
that?
my space is, well, Mara Grim told me a story, to be honest, because she said there wasn't enough Surinamese dishes on my menu. And
Oh.
that's a gangster statement. So, but I was happy with that, to be honest, because she gave me the opportunity to make dishes that I like now, and tell me also not to confirm because I have white audience that want to have kaas as well. So, but then we had a lot of discussions as well with my partner, because she's white. About what is the standard and what do I need, and can I also sell a broodje kaas, because why should I only do Surinamese dishes on my menu?
Yeah.
I have the space to just be that what I want to be in my kitchen, and If I want to cook ottolenghi today, it's ottolenghi. If I want to make a pepper pot, what I made today is my Surinamese style. We can have the world, cook the world, and I don't know if that answers your questions. I don't question my space. I have.
Good. I think that's amazing. I think especially since 2020, so many people have been asked to speak in this sort of monolithic way about your blackness or your brownness and what that means. But we, as an individual, you don't have the right to be able to do that. And I think that's where we kind of slide on Teresa and start talking about representation, because I think we need to see more representation in media and different representations, because, for example, like, as you said, you can't have this kind of broad brushstroke idea of labeling people, or black and brown people, you know? Like, you've got to see different personalities and different characters on TV. Yeah, exactly. People are different. So this is Reza. Sorry that you've been there sitting quietly, listening to everybody else. I definitely want to hear some of your points of view. He's a journalist, a media scholar, writer, author, looking into the effects of popular media on young Dutch Asians. And in his research, he tries to investigate why we need more diversity and representation in media, including children's books. Along with his wife, he has written 2 children's books, Where is My Noodle Soup? And Fried Rice with Anything and Everything. Love that. The latter is an endearing tale that demonstrates the beauty and deliciousness of sharing each other's food cultures, which I believe is trying to instill a sense of pride. You often hear children of like diaspora talking about not wanting to bring their cultural foods into the lunchroom, being embarrassed about it, wanting to have this sort of like monolithic culture. So I just think one of the most important and simplistic questions to ask you is, why is representation important?
Well, to follow up on one of the points you mentioned, actually, when my wife and I thought about writing a children's book, one of our goals was to counter food shaming. And
Yeah.
you just mentioned food shaming, and we were inspired. For this, we were inspired by one episode of Fresh Off the Boat. It's a sitcom, an American sitcom about Eddie Wang, who is a restaurateur, but also a writer and a media producer. And in this specific episode, Eddie Wang is transferred to a new school. I think he's about 10 years old or something, and he's really fond of his Chinese food. His parents are from Taiwan, and he gets to sit at a table with the popular guys up until he opens his lunchbox, and then all these guys are going like, "Oh, this is disgusting! Go away!" So then this is a really good articulation of what is happening in society at large, right?
Yeah.
People getting excluded because of the perception of Chinese people or other non-white people. So Tian, my wife, she has experienced the same when she went to school here in the Netherlands, and we thought, well, this is one of the things that we don't want to happen for our child. We have 2 sons now. One is 8, one is 3, and we thought, no, if they like rice, and they like rice, if they like noodles, they should be able to bring their lunch to school and still be included. And this is one of the reasons why we wrote "Where's My Noodle Soup?" To tell people, to teach people as well, teach school boards, etc., to tell them that every child should be able to bring the lunch they like to school, as long as it's nutritious, etc., as long as it's not, French fries or whatever. Exactly. So this is about representation.
Yeah.
We wanted to represent noodles and fried rice, etc., in a positive way.
Yeah.
And when we read in schools, that's actually also what we get back from the children and the teachers and the parents, especially the non-white children. When I read the book and I go through all the dishes in the book, pom, for instance.
Which I still haven't had, so if anyone wants to cook it for me.
Shame on you.
This is pom is a very popular dish among the children that we meet in schools, especially here in Amsterdam. So when they see their dishes, the dishes that they know from home, they immediately connect. They immediately connect with the story, and they are also eager to tell other people about their food. And this is what we, this is all about representation. This is what we wanted to get with the books.
Yeah. Because you work in media, and it's also, this is not just, as Ida said, this is not just a conversation about looking back at the past and seeing all of the troubles and the issues to be able to get into the media. But how would you suggest for people trying to break those boundaries, like Noah, who's written a show, or actually even start writing a book, become a cookbook author? How would you suggest to people to start pushing some of those boundaries? What kind of avenues would you start recommending people to go down to actually get into the limelight and show themselves?
Tian and I, we were quite lucky. When we had the idea for our children's book, we got in. We were introduced to our publisher, Rose Stories, and Rose Stories is actually, in the Netherlands, it's the benchmark in terms of diversity and inclusion in children's books, in cookbooks, in film and television. Rose Stories is the benchmark. And we were quite lucky when we had a meeting with Shafina, the founder of Rose Stories. She said, "Yeah, let's do it." So one of the things I would suggest is, if you have a great idea, just go for it. Don't let. And this sounds like a trivial advice, but I meet quite often. I meet people who were discouraged by, for instance, the people in Hilversum, the gatekeepers in Hilversum, who have told them that the stories would probably not sell or would probably not appeal to the broader audience, which is code for white audience. And they get discouraged and they stop dreaming and they go back to what they have been doing before. Mm-hmm. I would say no. If you have a good idea, go ahead with it and try to get in touch with people like Shafina at Rose Stories. There are a couple of other, for instance, in terms of books, Wilde Haren in the Netherlands. There are a couple of other. Sorry,
but do we need the media at this point, because you have Instagram, you have TikTok.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is there is space enough to tell your own story? Isn't
True.
It?
Yeah,
or why do we need the old school media? To be honest, is that do we need the old school media?
No, we don't. I think you can start carving out a way for yourself and your
I would say
through social
we
media.
need it, because otherwise I'm out of a job at the university. We need television and books. Yeah. No. But
Can you Judith?
No, but you're complete. No. I agree with you. I mean, true. We can carve out our own spaces on social media, but at the same time, for some purposes, it is beneficial to be able to say, well, I've made a television show for whatever broadcaster. I've written a book for,
Yeah, it's a platform.
Yeah.
You can use it as a platform to reach a wider audience,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I don't know if any of you guys saw that video of Viola Davis, but I thought she kind of summed up the whole idea of representation like really aptly, which was, why do we need representation? Because you need a physical manifestation of your dream. And I love that. Thank you so much, guys. I can hear the wine corks popping and the snacks being laid out on the table. But I did want to like summarize by asking you where your favorite Tokos are and why. I'm going to start with you because you already have the mic.
Okay.
Where's your favorite Toko and why?
I guess it would be. Yeah, it's a good question. The Indo op de Jan Eef. Yeah, I like the Indo op de Jan Eef.
Which-
It's an Indische toko,
Nice.
and some of his dishes remind me of my father's dishes. So yeah.
Nice. No.
I live in Noord, in Amsterdam Noord, and I always went to tokos near the Pijp and Zuidoost. And when I lived in Noord, I was searching for a toko near my home. And there's a new one at the Buikslotermeerplein, next to the Intertoys.
And you're like, yes.
And it's dark inside, and there's all boxes, and there's not really shelves. And the guy makes roti every week and barras every week, fresh, and they're really nice. And I once had to do a dinner for 100 people, and I didn't know where I could get my Surinamese vegetables because I needed so much. And I asked him, do you have this and this? And he just kept coming with crates, bigger crates from a door in the back. And I could just buy everything I needed from him. And now it's my favorite toko, and he's my friend. He's really nice.
That's what I love about Tokos.
Yeah.
You do become friends with the owners, you know? Thank you, Nani. Judith?
Okay. Do I have to choose?
Oh, so
Okay.
many. Too many.
Well, one is in Amsterdam Noord. They have not Buikslotermeerplein. Help me there, where you live, Ira. The Banne, yeah. The Banne. They have a little shop, and there also in the shop is Surinamese food also. But there's a lady that's cooking that. She's called Titia, but her bread is with the dishes. The Surinamese is very fine. The other one is Rustem at the Pijp, because they have fresh bara and rotis every single day.
Wow.
And the produce are very nice. And if I have to have more like strange or hard to get Surinamese things, that is at the... Marike, please help me. Where do I go always? Near the Buitenvrouw, Buikslotermeer, nee, Bosselommerplein, Hoofdweg. That's a very big Surinamese that has things that you can't find in the other ones, because they have, I needed a lot of suikerriet, and they had cases stacked as well. They have zuurzak in the freezer as well as fresh. They have gulang, sometimes freshly made. So it's big. They have a lot, and you can find everything. So a lot.
You need to give me a list.
I
need this list.
I can make a
We
list.
need a guide.
I can-
That's what
I can
Toko
make a
Talks needs, a
list.
guide. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Mine's is on the Tenkadestraat on the market. It's I don't even know the name of it. First one to the left, and my wife is Dominican, and they have every single ingredient I need in that spot to get down. So yeah, it's like right when you start at the market, the real part, not where all the cheese and stuff is in the beginning. And it's first one on your left, and they got the blood sausages and like
It's next to Rustem as well.
oh.
Also, they have
Oh,
two
there you
shops.
go. And yo, it hits. I mean, they have every spice, every hot sauce, every cassava, yuca, plantain, greens, like everything is in there. So I usually will hit the market, the butcher, and them, and be sorted.
Nice.
Yeah, definitely.
Nice. I think mine is, there's one on Dappermart called Millie Tropical. It's an African toko. Every time I go in there, I'm like, Auntie, how are you?
That's what
I'm
I
not
find
related to
interesting,
this
right?
woman at all.
Like all the tokos are different. Like the one that I go into, he's playing salsa and merengue. There's not a stitch of African in there.
No. Oh,
Not
no,
a
she,
stitch.
no,
Like it
she-
is. They are damn near Dominican. Like it's so Latino. that it's almost like at first I was like, who's Dominican? They was like, nah, brother, we Surinamese. And it was like, oh shit. And so it's interesting to see the diversity also in the Togos when you go
Absolutely.
Oh, and outside of the Toko, I like to go to, not really, but I think we have to go to the Zuidoost,
Yes.
to the market
Oh,
on
please
Saturday.
bring me,
Please.
bring me. I
Please
need to
the
go.
market.
Sorry?
You've never went to the market?
No, ever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you have to.
I haven't lived.
That's the biggest outdoor Toko you can get.
Oh, nice. Does anyone have any questions as we close up this and before we move on to the snacks and drinks? Oh, yes, yes.
Well, I just asked because I cannot understand all the names and
Yeah.
so on.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible that you make a small review with the names of it and probably...
Absolutely. We're literally... Yeah, if you look above your head, there's a camera there. So the whole thing has been recorded, and their names will be underneath, the description. And oh yes, thank you. And then I think we had another question here.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask what is your opinion on, for example, I was just like making, looking for myself like in the landscape of Amsterdam, food landscape. I was wondering, okay, I want to go to a taqueria, I want to find a taqueria. But I see that most of the time, like the taqueria that are in Amsterdam are not owned by, or are not coming from like Mexican or like, yeah. So and I was like,
None of them. None of that.
yeah, I know too.
Oh, you know two?
Yeah,
Okay.
but they just started.
Is it Taco Norte? Is she? Yeah. Uh-huh.
La Condesa.
Mm-hmm.
The one that's in.
In Albuquerque, there is this guy that is doing
Yeah.
a restaurant.
Another one that I know that's up near like in Bolo area. It's by one dude. He's Mexican. His brother's Mexican, and they just opened a Mexican spot. It's not a taqueria, but it's a Mexican spot that also has that. But
That's Lupe, right?
yeah, thank you. Yeah, Lupe. That's a real one.
But what's your?
Yeah, I was just making this. I just
But
had
food
this
appropriation
experience.
is real, huh? Like,
Yeah, and I wanted to ask what is, because we have like we talk a lot about like cultural appropriation and these hairstyle kind of like clothes, but how about with the food? Is it really?
Oh,
is your
That's a good question, but
but it's country, right? Like, no?
is it this country or is it just everywhere?
I can't speak for France because I never lived in France
Yeah.
for this long. So
Yeah.
But yeah, that happens massively. Like
Yeah.
huge concepts will happen in
Yeah.
every bracket. Like I remember when there was a whole taco phase, right? And then there was a whole like this Asian street food thing that happened, and it was all like frozen. It was bullshit. And, but no disrespect, it just was like it's not. I don't know. From New York, you go to Koreatown and like you get educated, and out here it was like Dawan and spicy wings and like like yeah. But then that happened with every single little cultural facet that could fall into like fast casual. It got snatched up. It got kind of tried to figure out. Most of it failed because it's not authentic, and then it ends up shining its face through like after the years. But it still like sours the that space a little bit. So then someone has to come in and kind of with this fried chicken. It's the same thing, right? Like it gets done, it gets kind of thrown on everybody's lunch menu. It's kind of like it's whatever, and then it's done in fast food and in red light, and it's this version of, and then it has this weird note that if you go to someplace else, they're like, no, what? Yeah, it's fried chicken. What are we talking about? What's wrong with you? Like it holds a certain standard. So I think that's part of going back to this like. Go own that space. Go claim that space.
Absolutely.
Like take that space.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and also
your
don't
own
support it
story.
if it's not. I'm big on that. Like if it's not, like if I'm walking into a Mexican spot, like my second question is like, is one of the owners Mexican? And they'll be like, nah, it's Jan Yop, and I'll be like, I'm trying it, but I'm probably not coming back. But that's real. That's just what it is because I want to make sure I'm supporting not just the business model, but also the person behind it, right? And I understand everybody has dreams, and well, then go be real and go find a Mexican chef, and then make him her or him a partner.
Yeah.
Like if you're for real about it, Mexico's a plane right away. Like go do your homework, and then go like If you keep it at 100, keep it 100.
Yeah. It's a massive question, though, for sure. Like, we could probably spend the whole talk on that conversation.
Yeah.
But I just want to thank all of the speakers, give them a round of applause. Thank you so much for sharing your stories and contributions. I want to thank Harold and Scheltema for allowing us to have the talk here. I want to thank Anna for taking the pictures. I want to thank the producer, Akane, for helping with everything, for producing this. Thank you so much. Yeah, let's go and have some drinks and snacks. So if you have more questions that you want to ask them directly, the authors directly, please. And also buy their books.